Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Inshallah, we're going to get started right away. Forgive me for not being able to be there in person. My daughter was sick. I had to stay home today. Inshallah, we'll get started right away. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family and companions and followers. We intend to learn and to teach, to remind and be reminded, to benefit and be benefited, to improve and be improved, to encourage holding fast to the book of God and the way of his messenger, and to call unto guidance and to direct towards good, hoping for the countenance of God and his pleasure and his proximity and his reward. And peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and his noble family, companions, and followers. Ameen. So it's really, alhamdulillah, it's really nice to be with everyone. And inshallah, we are going to continue for Surah al-Qiyamah and the discussion for the third part, I believe we're on. But before we get to that, we had an assignment from last week. And I know some of you guys are in the theater at New Horizon watching this, inshallah, and some of you are at home. Feel free to put it in the chat box or ask Ahlam to put it in the chat box if anyone remembers what the assignment was from last week. Yes, the assignment, thank you so much, was to think about what we want to leave behind to continue to do good and benefit the world after we pass away. So something that we would start in while we're alive, a form of good, inshallah, that we would try to start while we're alive, that even after we die, hopefully that good continues, and to make an intention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants us that, and in that it grants us success in that, and what is pleasing, or what is even more pleasing than that to him, inshallah. So I wanted to ask, as we try to each week, if anyone has reflections on this particular assignment. And you can send them to me anonymously, because alhamdulillah, when we're on Zoom, it actually is anonymous. So one of the reflections is they thought about it, and they realized that they would like to adopt an orphan, and inshallah, and provide the orphan, him or her, with a complete family and a sense of belonging, and hopefully to raise them or her well, such as they become a good person, someone who serves humanitarian, continuing a life of love and community service, inshallah. Ameen. What a beautiful intention. What a beautiful, beautiful intention, mashallah. And you know what's interesting is when I was thinking about this also, this particular assignment, I really thought about what a blessing we have in our kids, because the good that we teach children, in particular, young people, after we die, we hope that's a good that they would continue, whether it's something as simple as Surah al-Fatiha, right? Like, how many times is a child going to recite Surah al-Fatiha throughout their entire life? So whoever teaches them that surah, and they say it in every prayer, and then they say it in every situation where something, as a dua even, anytime they say it, the reward is going to go back to the one who taught them that. And so it's such a blessing actually to be in service to children, and because the assumption is that the person who's older would usually die before or pass away before the young people do, but then that legacy is left behind with them. when I was thinking about this assignment, I actually thought about what have my elders left behind for me. And subhanAllah, I thought about like my grandparents who have passed away. And there's something distinct about each grandparent that I can reflect on, even something distinct about each one of my parents that I can reflect on. That if I think about like, what is a big thing? They've given us a lot, not just, one singular thing. But when I think about a singular thing for each one of them, subhanAllah, I realized that, if I just look to my own family, there's things I can see, what did they leave behind that I currently benefit from? And then how do I, as a mother, for example, try to take all of that and allow that to continue, hopefully, through my own children. So sometimes you don't have to necessarily start something new, but if someone started something before you and you pass it on, right? You're just the link in the chain that passes it on. You also are rewarded because you're the link in the chain that's passing it on to the next generation. So alhamdulillah, that was another personal reflection I had, was just thinking about not just what am I going to start that's new? No, what can I actually continue that's old and it's gold? It's a good thing that was existed before, and how do we get it to continue on? SubhanAllah, we see this even in Islamic scholarship. Like we find that scholars did this. What would happen is one scholar would write a text, or would write like what's called a metin, like the almost like a poem or a short treatise on a subject matter, and then he may have a short commentary, and then a generation passes, and a scholar who has studied that particular text would then republish the same poem or treatise and then add a much lengthier commentary. And then another scholar would come after that person in a different generation and take that huge commentary and then add, let's say, another element of an edit, for example, like go back and add all of what they call tahqiq, to go through and cite every single source, exactly page number, work, where the hadith is coming from, where everything that's cited in the commentary, putting it in place, and everything that's even cited in the original text itself. And so someone may have written something 400 years ago, but then, centuries later, it keeps getting republished with additional insights and commentaries. And that's kind of like out of an etiquette with the generations that came before. This idea of there's nothing wrong with what came before. It was actually very good. What we can do is continue to add and contribute to it. And we live in America, we kind of live in, especially in the West, people usually don't like to take something from the past and then provide insight, commentary, and do a service to a text of the past. That's not necessarily part of the Western cultural tradition here in America. It is part of the Eastern tradition, part of the Muslim tradition. But in the West, people always want to be the person who writes the new book, the completely new text, the rewriting of everything, the revision of everything, the new theory about this or that. It's usually about like, I came up with something completely new and unprecedented. That's what's valued in Western culture. And what we find is in our history is we actually want to continue good. We want legacies of good to continue for as long as they possibly can. And to play any role in that is considered like a great honor. So here's a beautiful commentary. I just noticed this, and my apologies. She said, Assalamu alaikum. I think of this question with two perspectives, a religious and Islamic aspect and a social aspect. In terms of Islam, I would want to study Sharia and the Qur'an and pass down the knowledge to my community. Ameen, inshallah. That's beautiful. In terms of a social aspect, I want to do my job or whatever I want to pursue in the future with ihsan and leave an example for others. I actually see an example of this as Kobe, who had a really strong work ethic and went through with his passion with excellency. I want to find a way to merge those two aspects, though. Wow, mashallah. This is from a young person in our community. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for this. It's always very beautiful and really wonderful when we have young people attend and participate in our community offerings, because I hope, inshallah, you guys are the ones who will continue the legacies or the activities of before. That hand, by the way, that's my husband locking the door to make sure that my daughter doesn't, or son doesn't sneak into the room while I'm teaching. Alhamdulillah. The mysterious hand that locked the door. This is life on Zoom. Barakallahu fiki. I mean, may Allah grant you that way, inshallah, to have that excellency and example in your job or whatever you want to pursue in terms of career, as well as the religious aspect that you mentioned. That's mashallah wonderful. If there are no other contributions to this discussion, we can start the discussion about the Imam Ibn Ajiba's commentary on the previous verses. I'll give it a second. Okay. All right, just a second. Let me put this. So there is commentary from, well, actually, before we start this commentary, there is a question about the previous commentary that we have to talk about. So at the end of the last, or at the end of this part of the discussion where we talked about his ishara, or the sort of the metaphorical tafsir that Imam Ibn Ajiba provides after the verses, he talks about how if a person's basira is opened, their inner insight, then they're able to witness the reality of Yawm al-Qiyamah in every hour and even in every moment, because of the interchange of two states, two tajalliya, two different states, al-ifna and al-ibqa. And loosely translated, al-ifna is like self-annihilation or annihilation, and al-ibqa is subsistence or staying. And I said, I mentioned that I didn't want to talk about it because these are big terms that have, I want to say they're terms that scholars have specific meanings for when they're using it. And Imam Ibn Ajiba has a specific intention when he uses these terms here. And I didn't really want to dive into it without consulting his own definitions. So he has, there's a lexicon of sort of spiritual terminology that Imam Ibn Ajiba himself wrote. It's like a dictionary of these terms. And it's translated, a part of this has been translated. It's called the Book of Ascension. In Arabic, it's Mi'raj at-Tashawwuf ila Haqa'iq at-Tasawwuf. And it talks about these essential spiritual truths. And then he brings the definitions himself. So I'm going to read the definition that he has for these terms, this idea of, and what he's describing, and this is one of the reasons why I don't want to get into it, is I personally have not experienced what he is describing. It sounds extraordinarily beautiful and amazing, but I haven't experienced it to be able to speak about it from experience. So the only way I can really talk about it is by providing you with the definition of the author himself and the scholar himself. And so I'm going to read it from his own text. And in Arabic, it's fana, right? Annihilation, and baqa, which is subsistence. He says, when the people of Tasawwuf speak of effacement or extinction, this is the term fana, they are referring to effacement in the divine essence, meaning the effacement of traces and forms in the consciousness of God, or the dissolution of the physical before the manifestation of the intelligible. To quote Abu al-Mawahib, fana is effacement, disappearance, leaving yourself behind, ceasing to exist as an individual entity, right? And this idea of ceasing to exist doesn't mean you don't exist. It's that the experience of your existence has disappeared from you, right? The recognition of yourself has disappeared for you, from the person. And Abu Sa'id ibn al-Arabi said, it is when the immensity and greatness of God appears to the servant, causing them to forget this world and the next, their own states, degrees, stations, and invocations, effacing them from everything, from their own mind and individual self, and effacing them from this effacement, and effacing them from their effacement of the effacement, as this person is immersed, is totally immersed in the divine immensity. So what's being described is a state where a person, the only thing they're really experiencing is God. It's to the extent that they don't acknowledge, like in that particular state, they don't even see themselves, or even see the fact that they don't see themselves. They don't see their own dhikr or ibadah or works. They don't see anything other than God himself. And obviously it's not with the eyes. This is an experience of just witnessing God that's being described. This is to say that the majesty of the essence is revealed and effaces them from seeing created things, including their own self. Thus does this person become essence itself, right? They become essence itself. Like that's how it feels. They're describing a sensation maybe, or an experience, again, drowned in the ocean of unity. They also speak of fana in respect to effacement in God's acts, that there is no true doer except God and God's attributes, that there is no other one who is able, no hearer and no seer except God. Whoever is granted this effacement sees creatures themselves as being lifeless, powerless, unable to hear or see except by God. Then comes effacement in the essence, or as the poet has said, he is effaced, then effaced, then effaced, and his effacement becomes his very subsistence. All of this is what is being described is a spiritual experience, right? So this is something a person tastes, and they're trying to describe what that experience is like. As for subsistence, baqa, this is a return to consciousness of existent things after having passed away from it, right? So they went from effacement back to the world where they see everything. They see themselves, they see the world, they witness the separation of existing things. But this is only after they have actually experienced fana, like after the effacement, to consciousness of the sensory, again, after having passed away from it, in consciousness of the intelligible, except that the servant then sees it as subsisting through God and as one of the lights of his epiphanies. Were it not for the sensory, the intelligible could not be manifested. Or to paraphrase Ibn Mashish, were it not for the mediator, the one for whom he mediates could not be known. God Most High thus reveals himself between two opposites, between the sensory and the intelligible, between power and wisdom, between separation and union. To be absented from one of these is effacement, while to see them both is subsistence. To be absent from the sensory, from divine wisdom, and from separation is effacement, while to perceive them both is subsistence. Subsistence, therefore, encompasses effacement. For the one who is granted this station, union does not veil separation, effacement does not veil subsistence, and the consciousness of divine power does not veil the consciousness of divine wisdom. Rather, he gives to each that has a right its right, and gives to each what is merited. The terms effacement and subsistence are also used to mean the process of emptying and beautifying, takhliya wa tahliya, And so they may say he was effaced of his reprehensible traits and sustained in his praiseworthy traits. And God most high knows best. So that's the definition as it exists. And it helps us understand that the person who is able to witness the reality of Yawm al-Qiyamah in every hour, even in every moment, is someone who experiences particular sort of spiritual state. I don't want to call it a state, but it's a maybe a station or a experience, which is the interchange of these two manifestations of effacement and subsistence. Sounds really beautiful. Sounds really, really nice, mashallah. Even just to read it, I think sounds really beautiful. That people experience that, I think, is amazing. Maybe inshallah one day we can say, may Allah allow us to experience something like that. That would be amazing. But that was just to continue the where we left off before. And now looking back, Imam Ibn Ajiba continues in this sort of spiritual reflections on the verses, and he says, فَإِذَا بَرِقَ الْبَصَرِ, then when the eyes are dazzled. And he says, by the blasting rays, the eyes are dazzled. Here it's obviously referring to the Day of Judgment. But in the commentary of Ibn Ajiba, he's actually describing the experience of effacement in God. Okay, so it's continuing. By the blasting rays of glorifying manifestations of unicity in multiplicity. وَخَسَفَ الْقَمَرِ, right? And the moon is eclipsed. He says, when the light of the moon of the heart is covered by the light of the sun of the spirit. وَجُمِعَ الشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرِ, and the sun and the moon are brought together. And again, he says this is when the sun of the spirit is brought together with the moon of the heart. And in Arabic, he says this is called التجلي الأحدي الجمعي. Again, this idea of a manifestation of unicity in multiplicity. And he says, so the light of the moon disappears in the beams of the sun. And here it's the light of the moon of faith, of Iman, that actually disappears in the beams of the sun of knowing God. So when sometimes you can see when I want to say it's at sunrise, maybe when the moon sort of disappears when the sun is rising, and the light of the sun is so bright that it eclipses the light. At that point, you can no longer see the moon. The moon exists, but the sun's light is what takes on its own. Is so much more brighter, and it looks. It just drowns out. Even you can't even see the moon after that, right? At sunrise, and the light of faith is described as the light of Iman, right? That's the moon. And then that's compared to the light of knowing God, al-Irfan, and that's the sun. So whereas the moon's light is like, I believe, right? The sun's light is, I know, right? I believe in God is one state or one level, and that's completely drowned out by the light of, I know God. And that's al-Irfan. And then يقول الإنسان يومئذ أين المفر, that day the person will say, where is the escape? And here the reflection again is from the fear of disappearance or fading away, because this spiritual experience is so powerful that the person is afraid of just that they don't have the strength to be stable or to exist on their own, and so they're afraid. إلى ربك يومئذ المستقر, but with God on that day is their refuge and is their stability and steadfastness after fleeing to God. So So the verses are talking about Day of Judgment and people who disbelieve, uh, what their state was. But in the spiritual reflections, Imam Ibn Ajib is describing this as a reflection and on terms of the hearts of the people who know God. It's such a majestic spiritual experience that when they're it can actually cause some fear. Like, where do I go? This is so powerful. I have no power of my own. And so they find their strength and they find their refuge actually in God himself. He is the one that they flee to. They find their ability to be stable and to be steadfast after they flee to him. يُنَبَّأُ الْإِنسَانُ يَوْمَئِذٍ بِمَا قَدَّمَ وَأَخَّرَ. Man shall be informed that day of that which he has sent forth and that which he has left behind. Here he says that when they experience God and they have that steadfastness and they have that stability after fleeing to him, after they have this really powerful experience, they basically witness the fruits of their striving. That's ma qaddama, like all of what they worked hard in and worked hard for in terms of coming close to God. They're able to witness that. And they witness it because they witness the fruits of that in that spiritual experience. وَأَخَّرَ, they also witness the effect of the negligence at that time as well. And then he explains, and he says that the mushahada is on the level of their mujahada. So their ability to witness God and to witness even the good of what they had done, or the fruits of the good of what they had done, is proportionate or depending upon the amount that they struggled. The level of their witnessing is affected by the level of their struggle for good. And what they put forth makes great their ability to witness God. And what they neglect would make it less. بل الإنسان على نفسه بصيرة ولو ألقى معاذيره. And he says, let me translate quickly. Indeed, man shall be a testimony over themselves, though he proffers his excuses. And here what he says is that the human being sees the decreases in their heart as well as the increases or the decreases from their heart, right? The decreases of faith, the decreases of goodness, right? They are able to witness that in this world. They see that. And they also see things and that which increases them in their hearts. And here we're talking about their spiritual hearts. So they feel their faith, for example, increase sometimes and decrease other times. They feel the effect of deeds, certain deeds they do, how it affects their hearts. They may feel a certain way afterwards. They're able to actually witness this. And he says, if their basira is sound, if they're a person who, even cares essentially to observe themselves in that way. And he says, and it's if their spiritual insight is sound and healthy, and also their palate is able to taste things, right? So there are people who don't care at all about religion or about practice, good or bad. This is just not something they're concerned with. They don't even maybe care so very much about this idea of spiritual awareness or looking into their hearts. They wouldn't necessarily know this, right? They wouldn't necessarily have this basira because it's not significant to them. It's not something they're looking at. But for the person who this is very significant to them, this is something they're truly, genuinely concerned about and are looking to, they're able to actually witness these things in themselves. And so if they are neglectful in things, he says during their wayfaring, while they're treading a path towards God, any excuse that they could come up with is really not going to benefit them, right? Because of the fact that they actually are a witness, even in this life, they're a spiritual witness over themselves. وَلَوْ أَلْقَى مَعَذِيرًا. The excuses will not be of benefit. And one thing I took from this, and this is where this week's assignment is going to come from, is just how significant the idea of human beings, we have the ability to have a level of basira, of insight about ourselves. Our hearts have the ability to see the truth about ourselves, if that is something we're genuinely and sincerely concerned about. And that's a blessing. That's a huge blessing and a gift for all of us to just cherish and be grateful for. That first off, that we have faith, that we have iman, that we believe in Allah, that He guided us to this, and then that He put in us something that we already experience. Forget these beautiful, amazing, powerful spiritual experiences that we discussed earlier, but even at the level of the beginner who is just trying to get better one step at a time, that everyone has this compass inside of themselves that shows them, this was good for you. This wasn't as good for you. That wasn't so good for you. This was bad for you. And the person can know this through spiritual insight for themselves, right? As long as this is something they are truly, sincerely concerned about and really looking to, and taking, hopefully, inshallah, taking guidance from the right places. Now, so one of the things that I remember taking from the Beautify Your Home series that Sheikh Walid presented is he's talked about the day and how, like, if we start and end our days in a good way, that if you take care of the two ends of the day, the bookends, basically everything in the middle tends to take care of itself. And then also in the different times of adhkar, we know that there's two times where it's really good and significant to spend in remembrance. One is at Fajr time or before Fajr, and the other time is at Maghrib time or right before Maghrib. And so the assignment this week is a little bit more involved than usual. And I'm just going to stop the share temporarily so I can engage with you guys. So the assignment this week is actually to, if you can do it in a journal, it's better. You don't need to do it in a journal. If you want to do it on your phone, you can. I don't like having us constantly, attached to devices, and you could do it mentally as well. But the idea is just to begin to build the muscle of self-awareness. Look at and record for yourself 3 times in the day what you have done. I'm not asking you to plan anything. I'm not asking you to make the intention to do anything. That inshallah can come naturally. But for just a week, this next week, let's just write down, put like the first hour of when we woke up, what we did. The time or when the sun sets, what we did, what we were involved with at sunset. And right before we went to sleep, what's the last thing we did before going to sleep? And we just journal that for a week. And we write it down and we look at what those things are. And you don't have to write this part down. You can make a mental note of it, or if you want to, you can write about it. But again, I think it is nice to journal if we're able to do that. But just to map out those things and to just write down the impact of how what you perceived on your own heart, on your own state, on your own self, after whatever that activity was. You could be the first hour you woke up, you went and had breakfast, you made your bed, I don't know, did some chores, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Just write it down, and then write down whatever whatever you felt the impact was, if any. Again, the same thing at Maghrib time, whatever it is. I'm not telling you to change anything or to add anything or to remove anything. I'm just saying to write down the week as it is, as it's going to naturally flow, and mark down the impact of whatever that activity was on yourself spiritually, right? What did you feel that in terms of how did it affect your faith, your feeling of proximity to God maybe, or your motivation to do better or to be better, whatever it is. Like, it doesn't, I don't want to put words in anyone's reflections, but this is just, hopefully this activity is just to build the muscle of self-awareness and to enjoy the blessing of that we have as people who, alhamdulillah, have faith, that we can actually like look at ourselves this way and think about things this way, inshallah. So before I move on, are there any questions about this assignment? Okay, I'm excited about this one. I don't know about you guys. I'm excited. I don't know what I'm gonna find in my journal this week, but and it may be a tall order. We're gonna see if how many of us are able to do it, but I'm excited for it, inshallah. I'll share your screen again. All right. Now we have, alhamdulillah, we have beautiful verses for this week, verses 16 through 19. I think I finished. Yes, okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه ثم إن علينا بيانه. The subject matter changes completely at this point. Move not your tongue therewith to hasten it. The translation here says move not you tongue. It should say your tongue. Move not your tongue therewith to hasten it. Surely it is for us to gather it and to recite it. So when we recite it, follow its recitation, then surely it is for us to explain it. Imam Ibn Ajiba mentions that there are two different opinions about the munasaba, or the understanding of the occasion for these verses. One opinion is that the way these verses come, especially after the verses before it, indicate that the one who has the power to revive the dead, right down to their fingertips and their toes, also is the same one who has the power to preserve the revelation in the heart of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, he mentions that one of the indications of these verses is that rushing, or being a person of isti'jal, is blameworthy in the worst of things and even in the best of things. And he gives the example that, again, from the earlier verses, that the human being but man desires to defile what lies before him. And we talked about what this means is that they defile what lies before them in their life with essentially bad deeds that are pleasing to them and that are fulfilling to them. And so they're so concerned about like the immediate and rushing to the immediate and focusing on the immediate. And this is a blameworthy attribute. And he says, similarly, even in the most praiseworthy of things, which is, for example, the Qur'an, and our relationship with the Qur'an, that we don't hasten, we don't do isti'jal, we don't rush in our relationship with the Qur'an. And so what this emphasizes, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi mentions what it really is emphasizing is the blameworthiness of the act of rushing from the worst of deeds to the best of deeds. The second position is that this comes in the middle of the surah, like these verses continues. And this interruption is similar to as if a person was reading a book to someone else. And the person that they are reading the book to, the listener, like raises their hand to ask a question or interrupts to ask a question. And so the reader has to stop and focus on the question from the listener. And so they answer that, and then they go back to reading the book. And so here, what does that mean in the context of the verses that we're talking about? So the verses particularly address the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. These verses and specifically addressed the Prophet Muhammad SAW, encouraging him to wait patiently for the continuation of revelation. This is similar to Surah Taha, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَعْجَلْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مِنْ قَبْلِ أَنْ يُقْضَى إِلَيْكَ وَحْيُهُ وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Be not in haste with the Qur'an before its revelation is completed for you, but say, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. So both this verse and the verse in Surah Taha, they are understood as references to the Prophet Muhammad SAW. He had a fear of forgetting the verses of revelation as they were being revealed to him. And this led him to repeat quickly everything that had been revealed to him, even while new revelation was still coming down, right? So Jibreel is telling him the revelation, and there's, it's going to continue. Rather than listening to all of it until it's completed, the Prophet Muhammad SAW was afraid that if he doesn't repeat it to himself and memorize it immediately, then he's going to forget it. And so this is why he would rush to continue to repeat the revelation to himself, even while new verses were being revealed, and he's repeating an older verse just so that, because he's afraid of forgetting it. Ibn Abbas, he reports this, and he says, the Messenger of God used to bear the revelation with great trouble and used to move his lips quickly with the revelation. So God revealed these verses, meaning that God will make him remember the portion of the Qur'an that was revealed at that time by heart and recite it. Then Ibn Abbas mentions that, so when we recite it, follow its recitation, that particular verse, فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. So when we recite it, follow its recitation, means listen to it and be silent. Then surely it is for us to explain it, right? ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ means that it is for God to make you recite it. It will be Allah who will be the one who causes the Prophet Muhammad SAW to say it correctly and to say it perfectly. Afterwards, the Messenger of God used to listen to Jibreel whenever he came, and after his departure, he used to recite it exactly as Jibreel had recited it. That's mentioned in the tafsir of Imam Ibn Kathir and Imam al-Qurtubi. It is for us to gather it, right? Inna alayna jama'ahu wa Qur'ana indicates that Allah will gather it within the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's breast, ensuring that he remembers it correctly. There's also a warning in these verses for everyone that wants to understand the Qur'an to first read the Qur'an, right? And reflect upon its meanings and its teachings, right? Rather than drawing hasty conclusions, right? Really try to understand, reflect, learn. And this is a subhanAllah to read this right now, drawing hasty conclusions. For people who, sometimes there are people who have very big questions about verses in the Quran. And in order for them to understand those verses, they have to not rush. Like they cannot be a cup that's already full, because a cup that's already full, you can't pour any water into it. It can't receive anything. It's so full. And one of the reasons why it's so full is it's actually full of its own sort of hasty conclusions and understandings, and it's busy with that. It doesn't have space to actually hear an answer or to hear the foundations of an answer that may take some time. Sometimes a question comes and the question indicates the person has no foundation in the subject matter of the Quran. And so even to begin to answer it, it's like a soundbite will not answer your question. A class will answer your question. A full-on course will answer your question properly, but a soundbite will not. And a soundbite is like a band-aid to even the question that's being asked. A lot of times there's no fast answer to a question that requires a deeper level of knowledge from the root of their understanding of the entire subject matter. I was reminded of this the other week because, alhamdulillah, an Uber driver asked me some questions, and I encouraged them just to basically come and attend the majlis and attend some of our classes. And it can't be answered in a 4-minute car ride. And I think that a lot of the issues that are raised, especially whether it's in a conversation, usually less so in conversations because people have some time to sit down, but especially on social media, some of the questions or some of the things that come up, it's like this is a long answer to this question. Like this, to really understand what you're asking, we need to sit down, we need to map it out. You probably need to study a little bit if you really want a strong answer to this. And it can emerge as, I want to understand what this verse means. It's like, no, that's faster than just looking up the tafsir. Like the nature of your question indicates that we need to go to the root and to the foundation. Then surely it is for us to explain it. And here, verse 19, it also means that after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, has memorized the Qur'an, or the verses that have been revealed. And again, these are he doesn't need to apply any effort for memorization. Allah is preserving the correct memorization and recitation of the Quran in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It's Allah who is preserving that and bringing that together for him perfectly. That after that, it is Allah will also explain it to him and clarify the meaning of the verses to him and inspire him to know its meaning according to what God intended and legislated. Right. So not only does the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ not have to rush to try to remember the verse, to memorize it, to recite it properly, he doesn't even have to rush to try to figure out the meaning, because Allah will provide him with that understanding, the intended sound understanding of the verse. Allah is saying, Inna alayna bayana. It is upon us. It is for us. It is to explain it. And this, alhamdulillah, is something that would bring great comfort to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and it should bring great comfort to us as well to know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it was someone that he was an example of the Quran in his life. Like Sayyidah Aisha described him as a walking Quran. So his very life is a manifestation of the meaning of the Quran. And what he says about the Quran in the revelation, he has it perfect. He has it exactly as Allah has intended him to have it. And he has the meaning exactly as Allah has intended him to know it. And that this is, again, a huge blessing to the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, may we all appreciate him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May we all appreciate this gift. Ameen. And for this week, let me see. Okay, for this week, inshallah, I did leave some time for questions. So if anyone would like to ask a question, you can put it into the chat box. Or if anyone would like to add any reflections, you can put it into the chat box. Okay, no problem. We will close, alhamdulillah. If I was in Irvine right now, we would have been closing.
We have a question, Shaykha.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful.
It's from Haja, so she's coming right now.
Okay.
Let me show our video as well. Why not?
Assalamualaikum.
We miss having you in person.
I miss being there today.
Okay, so my question was about Baslira.
Uh-huh.
And you briefly kind of talked about how, as long as you're, following who you need to follow and kind of seeking the proper means of education, then you should be okay. But how can we truly make sure that our Baslira is where it needs to be and it's not muddled or confused with some of the things that are around us?
That's a very good question. In my own experience, I personally found having a mentor was very pivotal for me. So there's only so far I could go on my own, in the sense of like trying to figure things out, and obviously we all have an individual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We pray for his guidance, we ask for his help, and we ask him to show us what's pleasing to him and what's right, and to help us overcome things that are difficult. But I think that it wasn't until I had a mentor that I could identify better, like the self-awareness got a lot better because of a mentor. And one of the things that helped is, there's a saying, it says the eye can't see itself. Like the eye can't see itself, but it needs a mirror, right? And so that's kind of like what a really good spiritual mentor can do, is they can be a good mirror and help us to separate between, okay, that thought, that was waswas. That thought, that's not inspiration, that was my lower self telling me something. And this other thing, this is, I was just physically tired. It doesn't mean my iman was low. I saw something really funny on social media, which I could identify with so much, where someone said, I don't know if I'm having a spiritual high or a caffeine high. They're like, I don't know if this is a caffeine high or a spiritual high, because all they know is they feel good, right? So they're like, is this good spiritual, or is it just because the caffeine is just going through me right now and I'm feeling really good? And so something like that, where like being able to separate between what can be just emotional happiness, like there's a good thing to be happy about, versus a person could be going through a really difficult time, a really painful, sad time even, but they are in that time of difficulty and pain and sadness or whatever it is, they're actually very, very, very close to God, right? And they may not feel that way. They may feel like, I feel like I'm failing, I feel like I'm not doing enough. But that's where the spiritual mentor kind of helps them see that that may not necessarily be the case, or don't be so hard on yourself. That's not what you need to be doing right now. And so that doesn't mean that we still don't have a compass, right? So like if we have a mentor who's telling us something wrong, like incorrect, God protect us all, the compass kind of, the buzzer goes off, like, this, you're in the red zone, get away, go away, this is bad. This doesn't feel right, so the fact that we all have this in our hearts is a great gift. But if there's a good and like a true mentor in this way, like a true guide, I really think they help provide an insight, especially where we ourselves need to be guided into developing the muscle of insight in the first place. I don't know if that helps.
It does, yeah.
بارك فيكي.
Afiko.
Okay, Shaykha, Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, okay, I'll just close quickly with dua, inshallah, and then we'll close. Just for the record, I would have caught my train today. We were timely, alhamdulillah. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضى واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم آمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, O God, give us success to attain what you love and are pleased with. Make us amongst your felicitous servants. Allow us to die on the statement of guidance. Teach us what will benefit us and give us the success to act upon what you have taught us. Make that in which we are engaged pure and devoted to your noble face. Ameen, O Lord of the worlds. O God, make this gathering of ours a gathering enveloped in mercy, and our parting thereafter a parting of our sins purged and forgiven. Not one of us wretched or deprived, and peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad and upon his noble family and companions and followers. Ameen. Right, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. And Assalamu alaikum, Sister Nahid. Inshallah, you're in our du'as and your family's in our du'as. And we hope we get to see you soon. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.